If you have read a few history books, or browsed a few atlases, or read a few news articles, you have probably seen at least one instance of both of these spellings for the name of a certain city. Why are there two spellings? How are they pronounced? Does it matter which one you use? This video will answer all of those questions. As a sneak peek, both of these names, when pronounced correctly, have two syllables, and neither contains the V sound. And the spelling you probably want to use to respect self-determination is the second one with a Y. Welcome to TwoLambdaPlusBlack. I am still Heirua. I'm going to first address two meta-level items regarding this channel. You can skip to the second item if you only want to hear information pertinent to the content of this particular video. First of all, this video is an experiment in computer-generated rather than hand-drawn visuals. I originally intended for this channel to be a channel with exclusively hand-drawn visual aids, and have had a lot of feedback from people mentioning that they enjoy the hand-drawn aesthetic. But I am noticing that I've consumed quite a lot of paper for these videos, enough for me to feel like I ought to consider going through a smaller quantity of resources. Not to mention how many Sharpies I've gone through. Actually, something I've noticed creating videos for this channel is that Sharpies have a huge variance in the amount of ink they seem to have. I am curious as to the source of this variance. Don't have enough data to say this for highlighters though. I'm still on the same blue highlighter and yellow highlighter that I started the channel with. Anyway, let me know what you think of this new aesthetic. Second item. You may have noticed that this channel has taken quite a pause from discussing geography outside of the English-speaking Americas, and that is because I have been contemplating the implementation of a change in naming standards used by this channel. In short, TwoLambdaPlusBlack will from now on by default refer to countries, languages, populations, cities, and major regions by internal native names, also known as endonyms, rather than by standard English names, pronounced to the best of my ability, with on-screen captions on at least the first usage of each name per video, so that those familiar with the English name but not the endonym can tell what I'm referring to. I may make another video soon that goes into the specifics of how I'm deciding details like what counts as the internal language, and the pros and cons I weighed in the making of this decision. But as an example of this, in this video, I will be using the names Ukraina and Russia to refer to the countries that in English are called Ukraine and Russia. Those are respectively the names of them in Ukrainska and Rусский. I should also disclaim here that I am a native speaker of neither Ukrainska nor Rусский, and that you should defer to native speakers of these languages if they tell you my best attempts at speaking their languages are inaccurate. All that having been mentioned, let's go back to these names, both names that refer to the capital of Ukraina. Rусский and Ukrainska are both East Slavic languages. They have a substantial amount of linguistic similarity, but there are significant differences. The first spelling, which is the spelling most English language materials have used for a long while, is the Rусский spelling of the name, whereas the second spelling, which you have probably been seeing more and more sources use, is the Ukrainska spelling. Except both of these languages are actually written in the Cyrillic script, so these two names are actually respective transliterations of these. I will now proceed to elaborate on phonetic details. If you're uninterested in the specifics of why the two pronunciations are the way they are, you can skip to the recap section. These four letters in the Rусский name for the city are the Cyrillic letters that represent the K, E, E, and V sounds respectively, hence why it gets transliterated as K-I-E-V. But the name is not actually pronounced Kiev, because Rusский is a language that exhibits two types of sound changes called vowel reduction and final obstruent devoicing. If you speak English, you are actually familiar with the phenomenon of vowel reduction. Do you say American and development? No, you say American and development. In English, most vowel letters in unstressed syllables make either the or the I sound instead of the sound the letter is supposed to represent. This is vowel reduction, and it is also what happens in the unstressed second syllable of this name, where this letter that represents the A sound instead makes the I sound. Final obstruent devoicing does not occur in English, but is very common throughout the languages of the world and exists in most Slavic languages. It is a pattern of sound replacements that occurs at the ends of words and sometimes at the ends of syllables. Without going into underlying linguistics of final obstruent devoicing, the relevant rule here is that in languages with final obstruent devoicing, a v sound at the end of a word becomes a f sound. So the actual rусский pronunciation of this name is Kiev. By the way, you might have noticed that there exist русские names for which their last letters have been inconsistently written in English with a V or with an F. This is why this phenomenon occurs. The original letter is the equivalent of V, but it's pronounced like an F. The question is what the transcriber chose to preserve, the letters or the sounds. In the Ukrainska name of the city, it looks like just one letter is different, but a lot more is different than just that. First of all, even though this letter represents the E sound in most languages that use Cyrillic, Ukrainska is an exception, in which this letter instead represents the I sound. Ukrainska instead uses the single dotted I, a letter not used in русский, to represent the E sound. The sounds are in fact reflected in the transliteration into Latin letters, where this letter in русский and this letter in Ukrainska both get transliterated as a Latin I because they make the same sound, whereas this letter in Ukrainska gets transliterated as a Latin Y to reflect how it represents a different sound. The usage of I to represent the E sound and Y to represent the I sound in transliterated Ukrainska, by the way, is consistent with Czechtina and Slovenčina, Slavic languages written in the Latin script that also use the I to represent E and Y to represent I. Next, this letter. This is a letter unique to Ukrainska among the Cyrillic script national languages. Whereas the single dotted I represents the E sound, the double dotted I represents this sound with a y in front, where y is the sound of the Y in the English word yes. So the double dotted I represents yi. And now for the most interesting part. We learned that in русский, this letter undergoes final obstruent devoicing and makes the f sound, and mentioned that most Slavic languages have final obstruent devoicing. Well, one of the few that don't is Ukrainska. It instead has something more exciting. Ukrainska is a Slavic language without a V sound, and this letter, that in other Cyrillic languages represents the V sound, in Ukrainska instead makes the W sound. Despite this, most transliteration still uses a Latin V for this letter, but they are V's making W sounds. Some people actually use a W instead of a V to transliterate names from Ukrainska. When the letter is after a vowel in the syllable, though, a different sound change process occurs. It vocalizes. Consider the English word flu. The W at the end is not pronounced like a consonant, but rather becomes a vowel together with the E before it. A similar, but not exactly the same, process occurs here. The Ukrainska name for the capital of Ukraina is pronounced Kyiv. So, to recap, this is how the русский name for the capital of Ukraina is written, and it is pronounced Kiev. And this is the Ukrainska name, and it is pronounced Kyiv. Now for the historical significance. When Ukraina was part of the SSSR, as well as the Rossiyskaya Imperia prior, its place names were subject to the русский naming, and most outsiders referred to its cities, like cities in the rest of the SSSR, using the русский names or transliterations of the русский names. Soon after the SSSR collapsed, though, Ukraina began desiring that the names used to refer to its cities were the Ukrainska names, though most media outlets of the rest of the world were very slow to catch on. After the русский annexation of Crimea and invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk, though, Ukraina pursued raising awareness of Ukrainska names for places in Ukraina much more aggressively, and international media outlets changed the names with which they refer to Ukrainsky cities with greater earnest. For several cities, the change was merely an update from the rусский name to the Ukrainska name. Kiev became Kyiv, Kharkov became Kharkiv, Odessa became Odessa, and Lvov became Lviv. One of my favorite fun facts about orthography, by the way, pertains to the last of these cities mentioned. If you know the history of the region, you may know that once Lviv was part of Polska. The Polski name for Lviv was Lvów, spelled with W's but pronounced like V's because Polski uses the letter W to represent the V sound. So the city went from being spelled with W's but pronounced with V's in its Polski name to being spelled with V's but pronounced with W's in its transliterated Ukrainska name. Ukraina also made some more semantic name changes, choosing to rename all cities that were named after politicians of the SSSR. Most notably, the Dnipropetrovsk, which you may know as a city in which someone's name was cursed when he found out someone else had published first, was renamed Dnipro, and Kirovohrad was renamed Kropivnitsky. Once Russia invaded Ukraina in totality, international media particularly cared to use Ukrainska names. In these days, when you watch American media, for example, you will probably see the Ukrainsky capital spelled Kyiv and pronounced Kyiv. Well, actually, the media will probably pronounce it Kiev, which is quite different from how it's supposed to be pronounced in Ukrainska, but it is still distinct from the Kiev that they generally said before. But indeed, if you intend to respect the sovereignty of Ukraina, you should use the name with the Y, pronounced Kyiv. But if you can't manage that, then go with Kiev. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my patrons for helping to fund my channel. If you wish to help fund these videos, please hop on over to patreon.com/heyrua. There's a link in the description. And as always, remember to love the night.